Islam. I am Sade Renee L. All rights are reserved, and I'm back at it again with another video. And today I'm just going to do a quick video on the difference between, let's say, peace officers, policy enforcers, the de facto police, and pretty much just overall, just knowing your rights. And with that being said, I'm actually just going to get straight to the reading. Thank you for tuning in. Lots of energy. Please like, share, subscribe, and here we go. Many public servants swear an oath of office to serve, according to law, which is the de jure common law, also known as the law of the land. Public servants do not swear an oath to serve in de facto admiralty maritime commerce, also known as the law of sea. However, members of the private bar association swear an oath to serve the bar association, which presents a conflict of interest in matters of government and justice. The subversion of the common law courts support the crime of personage, knowingly representing a living man or woman as a legal fiction, a form of corporation, such as an artificial person, trust, public, utility, or foundation. Personage is committed by deceptively mirroring the name, causing unwitting joinder to a legal fiction, and is perpetrated by barratry, the crime of bringing false claims in court. The term barratry appropriately comes from the Bar Association. Your public servants include all officers of the law. Most frontline police officers, however, perform two roles. As a peace officer, they uphold the law, discharging their impartial duties under oath according to law, which is the de jure common law jurisdiction, also known as the law of the land. As such, they have a fiduciary duty to serve and protect the living people. Peace officers swear an oath of office to keep the peace and are protected by a public bond having limited liability. As policy officers, they enforce statutes which prescribe the legal term and conditions of contract with penalties, etc., in the de facto admiralty maritime jurisdiction, also known as the law of the sea. This role dominates their training and time. Policy officers do not swear an oath to enforce statutes and are not protected by a public bond, having unlimited full commercial liability. Police officers are either on duty, under oath, and in the public, or off duty, not under oath, and in the private, conducting private commerce for your nation and corporation. An admiralty maritime jurisdiction is not part of the sworn duty of a police officer. An officer conducting private commerce in support of the debt money system of bondage can be described as a private mercenary abdicating their oath. Police officers or policy enforcement officers have no jurisdiction over any living, breathing man or woman unless that man or woman consents to that jurisdiction. All legal jurisdiction over a man or woman requires their consent, and so all presentments from a police officer and a service offered by consent. It is important for us to know what people think of our service. In New Zealand, we police and consent and cannot afford to lose the support of the people we serve. Emphasis added. And as you can see, the link down there if you want to follow up on that information. All right. So we have a chart here, and we're going to go ahead and compare and contrast. So on our left-hand side, we have policy officer, and on the right-hand side, we have peace officer. So policy officer, that falls under admiralty maritime commercial jurisdiction. That's the law of the sea. And peace officer is considered common law, which is the law of the land. Now you see policy officer is incorporated office compared to the peace officer, non-incorporated office. Then we have police officer as a private contractor with no public oath of office and bond. And then we have a peace officer who's a public servant with public oath of office and bond. We have the policy officer as officer breaching public oath in his dishonor. And then we have the peace officer upholding public oath in his honor. Policy, we have full commercial liability, also law enforcement officer, also collecting revenue, performing commerce, and enforcing statutory contracts, compared to a peace officer with public capacity and limited liability, also a peace officer / constable, and also keeping the peace, upholding justice, serving and protecting the people. Also of the people, by the people, and for the people. Going back to policy officer, we have here the officer must establish that you are acting in the role of an artificial legal person, which is consent by joinder, in order to exercise jurisdiction over you. Also it says, while acting as a person, you are under contract, obliged to perform according to the terms and conditions of statutes. Continue reading. Only a legal person, corporation, can be taken to court for an offense. Also, penalties are statutory for a legal person, so do not apply to living man or woman. And last, it says de facto, in practice. Going over to peace officer, we have here the officer must have probable cause of, or an articulable reasonable suspicion that you are committing or are about to commit a crime to harm a living soul. While a living soul, you are in common law obliged not to cause harm, loss, or fraud to other living souls. Also, only if there is a victim of a crime can an officer establish jurisdiction over you. Also, Crime Act 1961, Section 9 says, no one shall be convicted of any offense at common law. And it's also de jure in law. The police cannot stop you, question you, detain you, arrest you, search you, or charge you without your consent. If there is no victim, ultimately, the administrative courts cannot fine you or imprison you without your consent. But if at any point you stand under their authority, agree to anything, or give them the artificial legal person name, you are consenting. The two basic types of encounters. Number 1, consensual, in which you are free to leave at any time. Number 2, detention, seizure, arrest, in which you are held by an assertion of authority or by physical restraint against your will. In any detention, seizure, arrest, the peace officer must have probable cause and or a reasonable suspicion that you are committing or about to commit a crime against a victim. The accuser bears the burden of proof to reasonably establish your crime. In any detention, seizure, arrest, the police officer must establish that you are acting in joinder to an artificial legal person name created by the state and controlled by statutes. The officer bears the burden of establishing your freely given consent. A police officer who stops you in the course of your lawful business without your consent or articulable probable cause is assailing you. Dealing with assailants. Number 1, identify your assailant, their motive, and jurisdiction. Number 2, require verification of a crime. No crime, no jurisdiction. Number 3, be polite and stay on point. You have the right to not be arbitrarily, stopped, detained, or arrested by chance, whim, or impulse. There must be an articulable and reasonable suspicion, that you are involved in a crime against a victim, and a witness can be a peace officer with first-hand knowledge and evidence who is willing to write an affidavit under penalty of perjury and full commercial liability, making the accusation of the crime. You have the right not to answer questions. You have the right not to provide government-issued ID. You have the right to ask questions. To control people, the police rely on ignorance of the law is no excuse. Police oath. I, John Doe, do swear that I will well and truly serve our sovereign lady, the Queen, and the police, without favor of affection, malice, or ill will, until I am legally discharged, that I will see and cause her Majesty's peace to be kept and preserved, that I will prevent to the best of my power all offenses against the peace, and that while I continue to hold the said office, I will do the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge all the duties thereof faithfully according to law. So help me God. After taking the oath, the officer holds the office of constable and is taken to have entered into a written contract with the Queen as the head of the state. The Queen derives her authority from the people, or in the right of the people, because sovereignty resides in the people whose power is the source of law. Now we're using sovereignty connotatively now. The oath requires police officers to carry out all duties impartially, fairly, with good will, and without malice. Discharge all duties to the best of his or her ability, and uphold the law, prevent offenses, and keep the peace until legally discharged. And as you see there, there's also a link if you want to follow up on the information. All right, and this information is courtesy of RV Bay Publications. I recommend you guys go to that website. It has a lot of information, loaded with tons of information. And I'll read as follows. As it says here in green, you do not have to show identification, and you cannot lawfully be detained or arrested or for failure to show. And that's Colander versus Lawson, in which the United States Supreme Court ruled that a police officer could not arrest a citizen merely for refusing to present identification. You utilize your national identification card when and as you wish, when you think the need arises. Do not, I repeat, do not allow any policy enforcers or highwaymen to take your identification as it is your property. Now, on the left-hand side, as you see, civil liter mortuus. That means civilly dead. Dead in the view of the law. The condition of one who has lost his civil rights and capacities and is accounted dead in law, as opposed to in full life, continuing in both physical and civil existence. That is neither actually dead or civiliter mortuus. Now it also says lawful amendments were made for clarity. In Amendment 5, in the last part it says, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. If this somehow occurs, make a claim with a bill against them for your property. The only person guilty of identification fraud or impersonation is those who have attempted to denationalize the natural people via negotiable instruments, example, birth certificates, driving instruments, etc., which are absolute proof of human trafficking. Therefore, upon them trying to force a negotiable instrument as identification upon you, they are also participating in human trafficking, which is an act of genocide. Each policy enforcer who does so must be charged with the same in both their private and professional capacity. Such claims made by you of this activity must be sent to the World Criminal Court. The rest of the world are aware of the rights of the natural people. They are aware of the acts of human trafficking and genocide. It is the unsuspecting corporate citizens who are not aware of what is really happening to them. And it is sad that they have been led to call it racism when it is not. It is not birthright theft, human trafficking, acts of genocide. It is not only, Just because an officer presumes interpretation of the law does not make it right, exact, or applicable. As officers of the court or as public servants, they are deemed to know the law, and they do not have immunity to the liability of not knowing or of their presumptions or assumptions. Now, Hofstadter versus Hayes. The courts are not bound by an officer interpretation of law under which he presumes to act. Also, Owen versus Independence, officers of the court have no immunity when violating a constitutional right from liability, for they are deemed to know the law. Also, it says here, this means we the people must be busy about holding anyone to the law. We must uphold and enforce it ourselves so that we are not molested by any other citizens. That is why Prophet Noble Drew Ali said, there is but one supreme issue, and that is to enforce the Constitution for the United States of America. Being aware that most do not know the law or case law, that support and enforce it, which were established prior by someone who did enforce it by them bringing a suit against the persons who violated it against them. This being done is disregard to the position they would say they hold. Most people have not generally enforced the law because the not knowing has placed them in a mental slavery, of which Noble Drew Ali, who was well versed in these matters, also made a statement that he has come to take you out of your mental slavery. It requires study, 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 in order to become knowledgeable and be what you know, as you can only be what you know. Again, all police officers and public officials are required to take an oath as a fiduciary trustee to the people of the state and the United States. McNally versus the United States says to uphold the state's constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and the laws thereof. Now, qualified immunity only protects police officers and public officials while performing in good faith. Now, Malley versus Briggs, that's Malley versus Briggs, 475 U.S. 335. A police officer or public officer loses their qualified immunity when they knowingly violate the law or are plainly incompetent. We also have here Harlow versus Fitzgerald. Government officials performing discretionary functions generally are shielded from liability for civil damages insofar as their conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. Also, we have here United States versus Gant. There is no good faith exception to the exclusionary rule for police who do not act in accordance with governing law. All right, and once again, this was just a quick video on knowing your rights, the difference between, and thank you for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please like, share, subscribe. Go ahead and donate, whatever floats your boat. I'm not going to lose any sleep at night. Go ahead and troll me if you want to. Again, I'm not going to lose any sleep at night. Free Baby Ase. She should be home any day now because, of course, they have no jurisdiction. So we're just going to continue the fight. And in the meantime, thank you for all the positivity. Thank you for the positive energy. Lots of love. Please continue to study well. When you're finished studying, study yourself. Peace and love, Islam.